Thank you. I hope you enjoyed your break. Unfortunately, I continued too long for the first part, so I became a bit confused myself, and I think you yourselves found it a little bit tiring. But now the rest is very short. I should have stopped earlier, I didn't. But it gave me some time now just to add something, and you'll see that I've added the mythical figures. Now, when we speak about race, we are actually talking about the biology of animals, and we're looking at the genes mostly. But you can also look at how humans created races in the cosmos, with mythical figures, half man, half beast, half god, half man, like the Sphinx in Egypt, things like that, and angels as well. So we can account for all those, but we account for them differently because we're not part of this. We are more on the mental side, and we're also not part of a technological side, the humanoids, the cyborgs, and things like that. Now, we have done the thesis, and we've done an antithesis. The biological stuff, and then how it's interpreted. So what we now have to do is a reflective synthesis, and I'm going to keep it short. Right. Now, what must we push past if we want to have a reflective synthesis? Well, the mentally developed realities, we must push past them. And the projected modernism of a paradigm dialectic. You can't have a synthesis when you just project the thesis. And we have to push past the Marxist-Leninist post-paradigm and radical narratives. And we must push past the proximate perception horizon. We've done that one a long time ago. And the pedagogic and andragogic information bubbles. You were taught something very specific growing up, and even being an adult, you go into this information chambers. So what I'm saying is you have to push past it to where synthesis provides a return on investments in science, entrepreneurship, and capital, which is your return on investments. So all three of those, science, entrepreneurship, and capital, gives you a qualitative or a quantitative return on your investment. And you must also search for effective investments. That is qualitative information utility, like a return on the ROA, that ROAI, which is it's called. The results of both these returns can be reported to the stakeholders and can be maximized if racism and racialism are engaged as a complex adaptive system phenomena and not a projection of some kind. So we need to have both the financial return on investments, money side of it, and then the, let's say, the emotional side of it or the cognitive side of it on the effective investments. It's more emotional than cognitive. Right. Now, if we're doing a quantitative evaluation of the ecological and the psychosocial dialectic on race, then what do we have? We should reflect on the ecological reality within the race debate because it's a fundamental to a strong thesis. Unfortunately, and that's one of our problems. Academia focuses on a projective thesis that has no utility. I'm going to get to that now. Academics in human science are following the narratives of celebrities. They're not working as academics actually. We are in academia, but we are following the celebrities. So, make of that what you may. So, what is this to find utility? The projective thesis of postmodernism suffice, because the goal is to, so what do they want to get to by keeping with those modernist projections? And they undermine countries with European populations who follow liberal philosophies, manage democratic institutions with a capitalistic economic foundation. So we zoom in very specifically on what they want to achieve. They do not go to countries with authoritarian regimes, which will shut them down very, very quickly. They undermine the political equality of opportunities because they want equity of outcomes. They undermine merit-based freedoms and the private ownership rights in favor of individuals. They undermine that as well for some reason. But they promote something as well. Political socialism at some level of intensity. They differ. They also promote social and economic equity of outcomes, as I've just said, across the population, and progressive social justice. That's the progressive thing I can understand in taxes, but in social justice it's a bit too much for me. What do they use? Well, they use the numerical majority of the Europeans, the numbers. That is the first thing they use. And then the numerical power domination of European males in institutional settings. So they say there are too many whites in powerful positions, and the whites are dominating the population and the culture. So, but what should you mean note about it? In Europe, with white people are First Nation. They forget about that. If we don't think about the Neanderthals now, the First Nation in Europe are the white Europeans. But they don't treat them like that within this radical conversations. So it's different from the New Worlds, which was the colonies which the Europeans had. In the metropolitan areas of Europe, nationals from Africa and Asia have reached either a numerical equity or advantage over the Europeans and many stick to their own cultural practices, expecting the Europeans to adapt to them. So there are so many people from the old colonies coming to the European countries that they are actually pushing the First Nation out and also putting their own culture, or trying to put their own culture in such a position that it can squeeze the old culture out as well. Now, this is a very kind of controversial thing to say, but just go and think about it. Now, in the geographic area labeled as South Africa, the First Nations were relegated to a numerical minority. First, they had to face the oppression of the white colonists, and then when there was a change in the political regime, they are facing the same thing from the new black regime, the African majority. So it actually started long before that, around about, I think about the 1500s, where the Africans started to push into the territory of a First Nation. But we are just looking at the recent history now. So, what can I say? Therefore, many of the claims made by proponents of critical race theories are not quantitatively justifiable. If you look at the numbers, they don't make sense, and are not useful antithesis. Remember, we know it's not a useful thesis, but it's also not a useful antithesis. In contrast, the historic layering of species, subspecies, and races using scientific evidence can provide a method for analysis of the emergence of gene difference and a useful thesis. That's what we've got here. Gene differences, and that can make a useful thesis. And we have to build an antithesis from there. Or we can use a current antithesis, but it won't give us the same result. So, if we're looking at the qualitative evaluation, we've now looked at the numbers. Let's now look at the mental ideas. The propositions used in the race identity and unfair discrimination debates include, for example, word labels such as racism, anti-racism, non-racialism, new racialism, meta-racialism, colorblindness, and I added this one, colorblindness. The race crisis is to an extent confusion around all these labels. And I say it's confusion because to a reasonable, rational person, the reality of non-racial mindset means to be race blind and not to judge other people on race, the ethnic origin, or on any race-connected attribute, such as skin color. So, if you're in a non-racial mindset, you're trying to be reasonable and see all people as alike. But, unfortunately, there's a counter-narrative. The race-blinded black person may very well argue that a white person with a non-racial mindset is actually saying that she must first strip himself from his clothes and go through his skin, or her skin, before the person emerges. So you must ignore the skin of a person and the clothes of a person to get to that, to get the connection. So they're saying you ignoring who we are. That's actually what they're telling us. A white person can connect with a black person on a somewhat equal footing. Okay, that's what we just said. And not only that, the systemic racism and the psychological distress from a past oppression are denied. So when you say you're non-racial, by seeing it is that you're denying who they are and you are denying the past oppression. And where you are now non-racial, they become non-racial and therefore race colorblind. They are, in contrast, race-blinded. So, therefore, non-racialism as a key to stop unfair racial discrimination is put in a deadlock. So you can't use non-racialism it's deadlocked by race blindedness. So, using this deadlock, those claiming often rightfully that they suffer racial oppression constructs a history of systemic racial argument that has no solution other than an overt insistence on anti-racialist mindset, in which the former racists deny their own identity, their own humanity, humiliate themselves, and take personal responsibility for all forms of oppression, past and present. And you'll know, if you look at YouTube enough, that there's quite a lot of videos on education and CRT, and where they are saying that actually the white children must kind of humiliate themselves, and others deny that. But I think there's some truth to it. So, but that's, as I said, overtly. There's a covert idea as well. The previously oppressed have in mind that the deadlock can only be broken when they take full economic and political control themselves, with which they can then subject their former oppressors. So what we normally say is this overt insistence on anti-racist mindset. And yes, when the anti-racist mindset says we are building myths around him, but we've gone through this myths in one of our previous videos, if I remember correctly. So you can go and just look at that again. An alternative to break the deadlock in principle and create a synthesis is to not claim colorblindness, to not be ignorant and deny the bad consequences and outcomes of racism, but to do what? But to purposefully act to eliminate race-locked behavior of your own. So you're going to first have to look at yourself. What I'm getting at is a meta-racial mindset. And a meta-racial mindset is looking at the whole concept as a complex, dynamic, or adaptive system. And it stays rational, reasonable, and transparent. So, what have we learned? Can we model something from all of this? What's relevant? And what can provide us with a utilitarian synthesis? Remember, we don't want any synthesis. We want a useful one, a utilitarian one. So it must also be ethical. So, if we look at the search through this origins of knowledge, which we've just completed, the whole first session, then race as narrative is mentally developed and explored with real biological phenomena, deflects and returns back to the imagined structure where other in reality becomes a mere projection. Remember we spoke about that? This is the shadows in Plato's cave, independent of the universal constraints. The shadows in the cave can do many things because we're not constrained by nature. In reality, all relevance is lost, and a solution by synthesis is impossible. Remember, we've said that many times. Also, race as unfair discriminator is associated with religion and underwrites concepts of chosen races and nations. We had that in the first session, where we said that religion kinds of supports the whole race phenomena. Not all religions, I'm specifically referring to the Christian religion. So, Synthesis is possible. We can say this. Race is an intra-species phenomenon and evolves within the same constraints and privileges, space controlled by the universe of Gaia. This is the gestalt in nature of Gaian intellectualism. Gaia is only referring to all the organisms on Earth which are interlinked and interwoven, and we really are only now beginning to understand how interlinked all life is on Earth, and it's actually quite scary. Right, race as human phenomena can be traced back to tribal life. Remember we said that? And the as-they narratives comes from the Stone Age. In a human context, we also had it in an animal context. And what we must understand, if we look at racism, and it's going to happen in the male-female duality as well, is brain size and organization is similar for all Homo sapien members, and therefore independent of race and sex. Racism is real, we can't deny that, and the prejudice, harassment and harm that surround it are facts. You can't deny that. But it exists not by itself, but within us that other space for verity from national sports teams. So what we see is we say we must stop racism. But then on a team level, and provincial level, and national level, we've got these sport teams competing. And you find this competition of them, us, or us, them, within these sport competitive areas. And that is good. But what we do not understand is that actually also interplays, as to religion, onto our narratives around the us other when it comes to race, or even when it comes to gender. So we must look at that. And to end, as innovation helps disabled people with mechanical and digital technology, the more we learn about androids, humanoids, which are robots, the more we must question how that will play out within a race narrative. But we are remaining in search of a good meta-racial mindset in modern human spaces. So, for next time, please look at what we've done, and when you look at racist talk, follow the money. If you follow the money, you might find who is behind it. So for next practical session, I shall appreciate it if you can watch LGBTQ and the Polymery in Animals of Antonia Foster. She's a biologist on TikTok, and it was on YouTube 2018. So in my next lecture, we move to male-female duality. Thanks for your time, attention and curiosity, and that you sat through that first long session. Thank you.